elevating the discussion while talking about the things that matter most. You're listening to Society and the State, Life, Liberty, and Your Pursuit of Happiness. Now, your hosts, Connor Boyack and Brian Hyde.
Welcome to Society and the State. Brian Hyde here along with Connor Boyack, and we're here to talk today about purpose, among other things. But I want to preface this with another word, career. And Connor, the reason I bring this up is because I have a sense that a lot of people get these two words confused. I mean, how many people do you know that identify, their self-identity is wrapped up in what they do to put food on the table as opposed to who they really are?
I think about how kids are asked often, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I think from an early age, it's very much inculcated that we serve a purpose that at least in part or in large part is intertwined with the job that we get. What type of activity do you want to do? You look at how oftentimes education is perceived to make you college and career ready. I cringe at that term, and yet it is so widely used, especially by governments engaged in taxation-based public spending, that they say, well, we got to make K through 12 students college and career ready. They got to be ready for higher education. They got to be ready for careers. And I think, when was the last time we made anyone purpose ready? When we set up structures and processes and incentives in a way that helped children identify their purpose, their passion, their talents. It would be much more individualized and entrepreneurial focused rather than corporate focused, which when you really dig into the history of public education, you understand that it was very much instituted a century ago during the progressive era by socialists, self-described socialists, social reformers especially, who wanted to create a population that was pliable and subservient not only to the state, but could easily go into the then increasingly industrialized economy and be good worker bees.
Yeah, I see it too with kids, especially. I mean, grade school kids, and you have school administrators talking about, do we have them on the right track? As if there's already a trajectory being determined for them. And I don't know about you, but I was well into my adult years before I had any sense of really what I wanted to do with my life. Now, that doesn't mean I was just drifting aimlessly, but there came a moment where suddenly there was purpose behind what I was doing. And nothing in my life has been the same since. And I know for a fact you have had a similar kind of awakening in your life. And maybe you could think back on this for just a moment. Do you remember a point in time where you realized that there was more to your life than simply, having a job?
Interestingly, for me, it was not until I got out of school, out of college. And I think in part it was because only then did I have the free time to then sit around and think and say, well, what am I good at? What am I interested in? What do I want to do? What am I curious about? Up until that point, it was tests and labs and papers and essays and homework and busy work and tests and grades. And you go through the gauntlet, and then summer comes and you just want to do nothing. Kudos to the folks out there who would use summer as a time for, individual pursuit of fulfillment and education. For me, it was, binge and purge, right? Like cram for the test, pass the test, forget it all, think nothing about anything having to do with school until you actually have to. And it wasn't until after I graduated where those pressures were no longer there, that process was no longer there, and I had a lot more freedom and curiosity and flexibility to kind of go on that path of self-discovery, figure out what I felt my purpose was, and finally find my way into it. This is actually one of the reasons why I wrote Passion-Driven Education, because in my life, seeing how late that happened, and by late, I mean it happened in my mid-20s-ish, late 20s. It's not like it was very late.
No, but for a society that's putting grade school kids on a career path,
right.
That's considered, well, gee, you took until your 20s. What was wrong with you?
Right.
Nothing.
And I don't want that for my kids. So, that's in part why I wrote that book, to say, why is it that I spent the first couple, 2-3 decades of my life going through the motions on this conveyor belt process, this industrialized process to be packaged as grade A meat at the end? Here's your certificate. You did well enough that we can package you up and offer you up to, willing consumers or corporations. Why is it that we accept that? Why is it that we're okay with that? And I'm not. I don't want to accept that. And so I want my children at the earliest age possible to be able to try and find out what their purpose is. Now, obviously, purposes change, interests change. It's not like we're locking 10-year-olds into their career path. I really dislike, especially in like Central America and elsewhere throughout the world, I know there are educational systems where basically at a high school age, you're already specializing in a career. They're having you pick a track, right? And so, yeah, you don't have to do science. You don't have to do literature. You're going to do programming or you're going to do math, right? And I think that's a problem, unless and until that child is extremely dedicated to doing that as personal fulfillment and curiosity, not just, well, I'll go down this track, I guess, right? So I don't want that for my children. I don't think, dear listener, like you consider that an ideal. Why is it, though, that we've tolerated a system that has enabled that, right? That says, well, this is the way it's done, and we're going to train you for a career. I don't know. I think that's really messed up.
Something you zeroed in on, right at the very start of the discussion, is how our schooling today, particularly higher education, is built around the model of, hey, do this, then you get a good job, and and that's the goal. It's all about getting the job. And it wasn't so long ago, I did a study on education in America, the earliest schools, Harvard, and William and Mary. The ones that go back to the very earliest schools, late 1600s, is when these guys were established. And do you know what those schools taught, these institutions of higher learning? You know what their primary focus was?
What's that?
Clergy. Now, not everybody who went to those schools became a dedicated member of the clergy, but the focus was on becoming excellent human beings. And that was the crux of most of American education up until probably the mid-1800s, until industrialization really started to kick in. True education was about becoming a truly remarkable person in whatever capacity. And for some people, it would be as an artist or an author or a doctor or whatever they became. But it was to develop character and personal excellence. And I'm convinced that it was easier to find purpose under those circumstances, I think, than strictly when college became about, well, it's about getting a degree so you can get a good job.
Yeah. I think it's hard, though, for a lot of people to find not only what their purpose is, but with the skill set that they've been able to develop, an application of that skill set to their purpose. So, for example, in a past life, I was a web developer, and I had many clients and worked for many companies where, I enjoyed the people I worked with. I enjoyed the technical challenges, right, and the ability to learn and grow in my own professional capacity. But at the end of the day, I was building websites for stuff sometimes I didn't care for, and sometimes I opposed. Like my first job out of college was working for a company that contracted with the state government. I built state government websites right out of college, and this is at the beginning of my, political awakening and whatever. But, towards the end of my web development career, again, loved the people I work with, enjoyed the technical challenges, couldn't stand the stuff I was actually working on. There was no passion and interest in it. I was wasting my time. Yes, I was providing for my family. I was earning a good salary. But at the same time, when I compare my life now to my life then, I'm still, bringing home the bacon, providing for my family, doing everything I need to. But it is night and day. I don't go to work being like, I got to work on that today. I go to work thinking, oh my gosh, I got like 10 things to do today. Which one am I going to do? It's so fun. I'm so excited. We're going to make a difference. Yes. And so when the purpose is behind it, when the passion is there, when there's a higher purpose, it makes all the difference. Now, the hard thing, let me ask you this, Brian, because when I've shared, my story on this type of issue before, some of the pushback that I sometimes get is like, okay, well, for some people it works out and good for them, sincerely, right? That's amazing. But, we're never going to have an economy. We're never going to have a system in which everyone is only doing things that they're passionate about. We still need people to cook. And I don't know that there's
take
so
out the
many
trash.
people. Yeah, take out the trash and clean the sewers, right? And so are we just kind of pie in the sky talking about how wonderful this is when really, that's not something that we can ever realistically achieve as a society?
I think that every innovation that has come about that's made our lives better, including how we take out the trash or how we have, flush toilets, for instance, every bit of that came about because someone at some point was willing to step out of what was the conventional wisdom of that time. Well, this is the way it's done, and found a better way. And I think that only can happen when people are somehow attached to purpose.
I think of the Squatty Potty, right? Like you've seen that ad. Here's something that helps people poop better, right? And you watch them on their Shark Tank episode when they were on there, or an interview since, and they're excited about people's what do you call it? Colon health, right? Like your bowel movement success. And they're passionate about it. They've created a product, they invest their time, that you can tell they enjoy what they do. They love helping people. And maybe that's where it's at, is that at the end of the day, when you're actually helping people, whether it's finding more efficient ways to take away their trash or help them, pass the meal that they ate yesterday or whatever, right? Like if there's purpose, if you're making a meaningful difference in people's lives, that's where the difference matters. When I get up in the morning, what fulfills me is not just doing interesting stuff. It's knowing that I'm helping and serving other people. And that's something you can apply, I think, to any sector, any industry, any skill set, right? You find a way we talked about this a few episodes back and talking about how many people have this conception where business is a dirty word.
Sure.
When true business is about an exchange, a transaction in which you're serving the person. You're solving a problem that would be much more costly or lengthy in terms of time for them to solve on their own. So you're serving them by providing that service. And I think when you think of it that way, when you find opportunities to use your talents, use your skills to serve other people, that's where you get into the purpose. I mean, you've been following this Bundy story quite a bit.
Oh, yeah.
And we know an attorney, Morgan Philpott, good friend of ours, who's been working on this. Now, there are many attorneys out there who slave away pushing paper and hate I know many attorneys who hate being attorneys, but they got to do it because they're digging out of a mountain of debt and they aren't very maybe entrepreneurial, or they don't, know how to get out of that conveyor belt, that track. Talk about your experience in observing Morgan and how he's pursuing this purpose.
Yeah, I've had the chance to watch Morgan at work in the courtroom, and I've watched the purpose that he brings to defending Ammon Bundy. And my understanding is he is defending him pro bono. So it's not that people are saying, oh, well, he's doing it all for free. There are people who are donating, but he stepped up to defend this man because there was purpose, because there were principles that they shared in common. And, I'm sure there are attorneys out there who, for the money, will do a great job for you too. Jerry Spence comes to mind. I'm sure he would do a great job. He's also very, very expensive. But what I saw Morgan doing was operating on purpose, and that purpose translated into impact. And everything I hear you describing about when you are using the talents, the passions, the skills that you have, when you start using them to have impact, it changes your life in a very real way. And it's impossible to go back to simply the climbing the corporate ladder and looking forward to, well, am I going to get a new title or a new promotion? And for that matter, even measuring your success simply by what your pay stub says.
Right.
When you are having impact, you have a new dimension, or maybe even multiple dimensions to life that weren't there before. And it may seem like pie in the sky. I get that. I get that pushback too sometimes. Well, how can a person do this? Because it's not easy to find purpose. You mentioned it took you a while to figure it out. It took me a long time too. I mean, I tried a lot of different things, but there were some common things that came up. And actually, our friend Steve Palmer has written about this. So let me share 4 real quick things you can do to identify where you have authentic purpose.
Cool.
He says, what you respond to quickly. And he gives the example of a guy who once won the Mr. America title. And he asked him, how did you get into bodybuilding? And the guy kind of shrugged and said something like, well, I don't know. I just started lifting weights with my dad and my body just responded to it. And Stephen made the comment that it was such an offhanded comment, and yet the guy was describing exactly what it was that caught his attention, that persuaded him to actually grasp bodybuilding and become to gain mastery of it. And he says, when you have something that you respond to almost naturally, that's something you should pay attention to. Same way that Van Gogh took to painting and Mozart to music, or Frank Lloyd Wright took to architecture. There are things that you respond to naturally and quickly, and you need to pay attention to what those things are. Things you remember easily. I've noticed, Connor, you have a real mind for remembering facts, figures, dates, principles. And you probably noticed at some point in your life that those things kind of came to you. You didn't have to worry. And not everybody has the same gift. So We're not talking about you're in a race with somebody else.
Sure.
The biggest opponent that you're facing is likely yourself. But if you remember things and they come to you easily, that's another big clue that you are approaching purpose. If you've ever thought, I could do better than that. Maybe you're watching somebody, I don't know, swimming, the 200-meter freestyle. I could do better than that. That can sound cocky, and it could be taken to a cocky end. But if you recognize that you have aptitude, for writing a book or for explaining a difficult concept to people, that's another indication that you're approaching purpose. And last but not least, where your heart is. You mentioned when you come to work, it's with excitement and with anticipation that there is something I'm going to do today that is going to make the world a better place. And you don't have to guess whether it will or not because you've seen it do it before. And you're keeping the momentum up and keeping it going. Your heart is in sync with whatever it is that makes you happy and motivates you. And I realize, this may sound like a motivational speech to some people, but if you can tap into that, you are destined to become a lot happier with whatever you're doing.
I think of it this way. When I visited Africa, it's been about a decade. I went to Zambia on a service trip, and we first flew into South Africa and then up to Zambia. And I experienced chocolate for the first time. Actual good chocolate in South Africa. Cadbury. It was a Cadbury brand, but they don't sell Cadbury here like they do there. And I had grown up on Hershey's, right? Like that was chocolate. And oh my gosh, night and day difference. And you can get these chocolates, in America, especially if you find them at like gourmet candy stores and foreign stores and stuff like that. But man, the Europeans, right, especially can make much better chocolate than we have. I am now a chocolate snob. I mean, I'll eat a Hershey's if it's laying around and my sugar tooth is,
if that's all there is.
Exactly.
Okay.
I'll settle. Exactly. It's supply and demand. But the demand is for the good chocolate. I've tasted good chocolate. I know what it's like. And if I have my druthers, if I have the ability to choose, I'll pay a little more for the good stuff because I've experienced it. I think it's that way with purpose too, right? I have now experienced, for my part, you have as well. Hopefully our listeners have. If not, here's an opportunity, right? I have experienced what it's like to spend my days pursuing work that has meaning, has purpose, has influence, helps other people. I never not want to do that now. It is addicting. It is fulfilling. It is motivating. It is inspiring. I've thought about okay, if all of my donors at Libertas Institute just walked away from us and all of a sudden I can't pay the bills, I lay everyone off, I have to quit, the whole organization implodes. If doomsday for Libertas came, what would I do? And I thought, well, would I go back to doing web development? And I just recoil at the thought thinking, no way, because the ability to do what I do, we've changed laws, we've changed minds, we've written books, we've persuaded, tons of people. Like I would want to scratch and claw and find a way to still be able to do that, right? Like it's a drug now. I want to keep the addiction going. I've experienced good chocolate. I've experienced purpose. Dear listener, if you haven't, in your full-time profession or your pursuits, man, it is something else, and you will never not want to be able to do that. For me, it comes down to this. And obviously, there are times when you can't make this happen. This is an ideal, and ideals you can't always attain, right? But to me, the ideal is that life is too short to do things that you hate. Sometimes you have to. I hate cleaning toilets. Maybe someday I'll find wealth. Maybe Bitcoin will reach, $100,000 per Bitcoin, and I can afford someone to come clean my toilets, and I no longer have to. In the meantime, I hate cleaning toilets, and yet I do it, right? So we have to do things we dislike or that we hate, obviously. But in terms of like a full-time pursuit, I know many people who hate their jobs, who are miserable, and they're not, I don't know if they're not entrepreneurial minded. They don't have a skill set that they think that they can pivot into something else or whatever. They're mired in debt. They're underwater in their mortgage. They feel comfortable even if they're miserable. They don't want to leave that security blanket even if it's, smells really bad. It's still a security blanket. I feel for them because that's tragic in my mind. They're paying the bills. That's all great. But, oh, man, it is night. Like, I see all these people Halloween eating Hershey's candy, and I want to say, there's something better out there. You must experience it. Let me buy it for you, right? And I think it's the same thing with purpose. I think people really need to hustle and find how they can do that. And once you experience it, it is an eye-opening, very fulfilling thing.
The thing that made it happen for me was getting let go from a job about 7 years ago, just out of the blue. And I mean, blindsided. Management showed up and handed me my pink slip and said, "You're done." And I walked out the door going, man, okay, now what? And here's the difference. I had been learning about purpose and learning about the idea of maybe there's more to life than simply generating a paycheck. Not that I don't like having food on the table and a roof over my head, but how I saw myself was different. And I didn't realize it until the moment that I was kicking a pebble down the road. And that was the first time in my life that I realized, I mean, I'd been doing radio for 20 some odd years at that time. But that's the first time I realized that's not all I can do. And with that realization, and with the realization that there are better and higher uses of my talents and my passions and my skills that I've developed over the years, suddenly there were more opportunities than I could handle. And I don't want to make it sound like it was this magical, mystical thing. It was scary, to be sure. But once I broke out of that mold of seeing myself as just a worker bee who would only be able to do this job, and that's the only thing I was fit for, the possibilities were remarkable. And I wish everybody could have that experience, if only to see that we are all capable of so much more than we give ourselves credit for. So I don't know what it would take to shock you into seeing that in yourself, but I wish that for you, if only for the experience of seeing that every person can contribute. Every person has purpose. And it's not the same. You know, there's no one-size-fits-all approach here. But if you can find it, it will make, as Connor put it, a night and day difference in your life. You'll be eating Cadbury chocolate.
There's nothing like Cadbury. Delicious. I'm never going back unless all that's available is Hershey's. Guys, thanks for joining us. Find your purpose. You will love it. Your life will change. Stick with us for the next episode. Josh Steinley is going to join us. We talk today about purpose. Next time, we're going to talk about influence. It's not enough to find your purpose. You got to then help others do the same, persuade other people, influence other people. It's a great conversation that we're going to have. Stick with us next time here on Society and the State.
You've been listening to Society and the State. For show notes, archives, and more great content, visit societyandthestate.com.